Happy holidays to you. If you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. I celebrate Christmas. In fact, it's my birthday today, so I am having a double celebration this year, baby, as I do every year. If it so happens that it's your birthday, I want to wish you a happy birthday and a very Merry Christmas as well. If you celebrate Hanukkah, well, happy Hanukkah to you. I know that Kwanzaa begins tomorrow. Want to wish you and yours, if that's what you celebrate, the most blessed, prosperous, happy Hanukkah. So I thought I'd spend some time with you today on my birthday. This is my Christmas gift, my birthday gift to you. I wanted to share some thoughts on an event, a historical event that took place 105 years ago, known as the Christmas Truce of 1914. Now, for those of you who are history buffs, you'll remember that World War I, or the Great War, as they called it back then, started in July 1914. Archduke Ferdinand, the heir to the Austria-Hungary Empire, was assassinated in July 1914 in Sarajevo. And that assassination kicked off a whole series of events that devolved into World War I. Now, you know, as these wars go, whenever they get started, the idea is that it's always going to be quick, right? And so this should have ended in a couple of months, but before you know it, 5 months had passed, and it's now December 1914, and the troops are on the front line. There was obviously a lot of indiscriminate killing from machine gun fire, artillery, shells. By 1915, they had introduced poison gas to the campaign. And so soldiers were suffering from malnutrition, they were suffering from shell shock, or as we know it today, PTSD. And so there was a high level of depression and suicides. They lived in rat-infested, louse-infested trenches, suffering from frostbite and, losing toes and fingers from gangrene and so on. So needless to say, the morale on either side, both the German side and the Allied side of the war, was incredibly low. And so it's Christmas, it's December, and these soldiers are now thinking back to the time when, run about this time of year, they would be back home in safety, in the warmth of their own homes, enjoying the food and spending time with loved ones, creating memories and rehashing old memories. And while they were there, and obviously they didn't have cell phones back then, and they didn't have reporters embedded with them. That would have been awesome. But while they were there, a German soldier who was in his trench decided or started singing Silent Night, and his voice carried across no man's land to the British trenches. The other German soldiers, his fellow comrades, joined in the singing, and before you know it, the British soldiers are singing Christmas carols, the German soldiers are singing, and they're taking turns. Sometimes they kind of sang songs together, serenading each other. And this happened throughout the night. By the next morning, a few officers crawled out of the British tent and headed into no man's land, followed eventually by some of their own soldiers. The German soldiers met them in no man's land, and the most amazing thing happened, right? Has never happened before in the history of warfare, and it hasn't happened since. The Christmas truce, right? They started to exchange gifts, chocolates, cigarettes, liquor, food, badges, mailing addresses, so that they could write to each other after the war. And then they also used the time to recover their dead and give them a proper burial. There was also a report of a soccer game between the German and the British troops. Don't know who won, but the thing that I'm more curious about is who brings a soccer ball to a war, right? But obviously they did. As I said, the truce happened, and it has never happened since. But I think it has left us that monumental experience, has left us with some really valuable lessons that I think we can apply to our lives even today. So I want to spend some time just sharing quickly with you about 3 of them. The first one is the fact that as human beings we have the potential for empathy. Now, as you know, empathy is a psychological identification we have with the thoughts and feelings and attitudes of another person. When I think about the Truce of 1914, maybe the biggest thing that came out of that experience was the realization that as human beings we have an aversion to killing people that we identify with, especially when they haven't done anything in particular to harm us. And some of you may go, what are you talking about, Devon? They were at war, they were shooting at each other, they were trying to kill each other, and I agree with you. In fact, some of them may have even volunteered for the army, but what I know is that they never sauntered up to the front lines looking for a fight. They were sent there, they were ordered there. And so, as they were there, starting to sing these carols, they started to relate to each other. In fact, think about this a little bit more broadly. Both sets of soldiers were European. They had a common culture, right? Some of those Germans lived in the UK. Some of the Brits had been to Germany. Some of the Brits spoke German. Some of the Germans spoke English. They were Christians. They observed Christmas. So they had that in common. So as they started to sing the Christmas carols, they began to relate to each other. They could identify with the pain of the other, sitting in these, frigid, frozen trenches that are rat-infested. They are malnourished, they are shell-shocked. So they could identify with each other, and once that they started to create that kind of relationship, so to speak, they became reluctant to fight and to kill each other. But that's the power of empathy, right? So powerful it is that leading into World War II, a lot of effort was made to make sure that there was no fraternizing with the enemy. I mean, the powers that be recognize that in order to send soldiers to war, you have to overcome this one of the core human value, which is a reverence for life, right? And the way they did that was by dehumanizing the enemy, right? If I could coin a word, they engage in the practice of the enemification of the enemy. They painted this picture of them as the other, right? Those that you should not relate to. And if you can't relate to that person, then you can't have empathy for them. But obviously, back in around about this time in 1914, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, 1914, there was a lot of empathy in the air. Think about this for a minute, just for a sec. Think about this. I see war as the manifestation of the worst of our nature as human beings, right? And so here you have these men demonstrating the worst of our nature as human beings, by killing and maiming each other. And even as you're in the midst of this horrific experience, they were somehow able to tap into, they were able to connect with their collective humanity and to show empathy for each other. I think we could learn a lot from these young men all these years ago. There's a Jamaican philosopher, you may have heard of him, Bob Marley. He says there's so much trouble in the world, right? If you look, World War I was fought under the pretense that this was going to be the war that ended all wars, right? And for a few years it worked, but then World War II rolled around, and since 1939 up to this day, there has never been a year when there has never been a hot conflict somewhere in the world. So yeah, there's so much trouble in the world, man. There's so much trouble in the countries, in our respective countries, in our respective cities and communities and neighborhoods. And I think that a big part of the reason why that is because we have lost our ability, or more accurately, we have stifled our ability to empathize, to show empathy, to connect, to identify with others. Too many of us, I believe, have kind of joined forces with those who would much rather dehumanize our neighbors because of their ethnic background or their nationality or their political persuasion, their religious beliefs, their sexual orientation, or whatever it is. So we need to be like those soldiers back in 1914 who, in the midst of this horrific experience, connected with their humanity, identified with the guy across no man's land who was trying to kill him, because he recognized, as we should, that we have so much more in common than separates us, right? If we're able to do that, then we'll start be able to solve many of the conflicts that arise. The second lesson from the Truce of 1914 that I want to share with you is the fact that we must live and let live. As I mentioned earlier, soldiers from both sides, the Germans and the Allied sides, met in no man's land and exchanged gifts and fraternized, right? But I would say that that was the high watermark, the high point in this truce. I think the truce was reflected over a longer period of time by their reluctance to engage in any aggressive action. So during the day, the guns would blaze, and round about 6 p.m. every evening for an hour, they would go silent. That was a time when both sets of soldiers were having dinner. That's when they were eating. That was mealtime, and they didn't want to interrupt their meal to have to go kill someone, or worse yet, be killed. And so they negotiated that pause, that lull in the fighting. Another way in which they demonstrated this live and let live idea was by the fact that they did not attack food transport. So whenever replenishments were coming in, they didn't attack the other guys' resupplies. The idea was here was, hey, I'm letting you eat, so you should let me eat. Also, every evening after nightfall, they would venture out into no man's land to recover their dead comrades. And the enemy would refrain from shooting, engaging them, so that they could recover their dead. Again, this business of live and let live. I think this idea of live and let live is an extension, it's another form of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. When we live and let live, then we don't need to judge or criticize or condemn others. We don't need to control them or try and control them and have them adapt or accept our way of thinking. We simply live our lives and let them live their lives as well. It's a concept that I think most people in society agree with in theory, but admittedly, society is, a lot more complicated when you compare it to a scenario where you have enemy combatants squaring off against each other across a clear battle line, right? So because it's so complex in today's society, it's difficult to execute. We all desire freedom and equality, but it's sometimes difficult to cooperate in order to achieve that, especially when the other person is so radically different. I mean, race, for example, is one of those obstacles that really get in the way of allowing others to live and let live, and that's historical, right? But then there's the politics and religion and all of those things. Just imagine, a guy walking down the street in a Make America Great Again hat, right? And he comes up, meets up a guy who's wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. It's unlikely that those guys are going to have a conversation. It's unlikely that they're going to engage in this live and let live idea. But if they could only find a way to have empathy, to see the commonalities, to express more tolerance of each other, then they'll be able to have a conversation that would, allow them not necessarily to change minds, but to understand each other better. That's part of the big problem when we don't live and let live. The idea, I think, is to respect the rights and sovereignty of others to define and pursue their own happiness, right? And when you do that, I think it creates peace in your lives, right? And it creates peace in our lives. It gives us the ability, it liberates us to really focus and work on our own issues, and at the same time allow us to quell conflicts or to get a handle on them before they get bigger when they do arise. And the third lesson that we can glean from the experience of the Christmas truce of 1914 is that we must learn to trust. As I said earlier, few officers on Christmas morning, few British officers, crawled out of their trenches and made their way across no man's land to the German positions. Obviously at great risk, because they could have been cut down by machine gun fire or taken out by a sniper. Fortunately, it didn't happen, right? It proved to be very rewarding because we ended up with a Christmas truce. The lesson here is that all of us at some point in our lives have to take that leap of faith and trust without any assurance that things are going to work out and we're going to work and we're going to be rewarded, right? The fact of the matter is that, with some exceptions, all of us can walk down the street without any fear that the person that we encounter is going to do us any harm, right? Of course, there are exceptions to that rule. But compare that. It's a very different scenario compared to these soldiers, these officers who walked across no man's land, right? Knowing that the guy on the other end, his express purpose is to shoot and kill you, right? So yes, we have to, it's a powerful lesson for us to take from them, and we have to, at some stage, recognize that we have to step out of our comfort zone. We have to embrace this idea of empathy, looking for and connecting with those things that we have in common with others, and stop seeing them as enemy. Because if we are able to do that, I think we can step out in trust, step out in faith, and be rewarded handsomely with neighborhoods and communities and cities and countries, and eventually a world that abides in peace and in love. That really is the Christmas message, though, isn't it? And it was demonstrated so forcefully, so powerfully in the most unlikely place, a battlefield. And so as we celebrate the rest of this joyous day, Christmas Day, I want to encourage you to remember what this season is about. It's about love, it's about community, it's about connection, right? Gifts in terms of giving of ourselves. Forget about stop focusing so much on all the gifts that you have purchased. Let's figure a way to give of ourselves more. That's the most important, more enduring gifts that you and I can give. And may we take that not just for today, but for every day going forward. The lessons of empathy, live and let live, trust, love, connection, giving of ourselves. So yeah, those are the thoughts I wanted to share with you on this Christmas Day. Want to wish you and yours a most joyful, blessed, happy holiday season, and hey, lots of plenty in 2020. As always, keep on pushing.